Okay. So before Jens starts his talk, I will say a few words about his background. He's a sociologist. He started at the University of Magdeburg and Mainz. He had a short visit at Warwick for a while. He's a sociologist working on economists and economic discourses of economists. So he's long been pushing the agenda for being interested in the area of how economists communicate in the area of academia, in the public, in policymaking. So he's very much been interested in empirical work in that group of experts that act globally. I mean, oftentimes through the English language, of course, but with quite considerable effects and influence in various national contexts. And Jens has been interested in accounting for the dynamics that help certain economic knowledges is being established in these different areas, also in policymaking areas. Yeah, he's now at the University of Gießen, and he's been a member of the DiscourseNet board since the beginning. He's a very active driving force within DiscourseNet for a long time. Jens has been especially behind the DiscourseNet working paper series. And you're organizing a DiscourseNet conference in next April, right? March. I think the call has been sent around, or is going to be sent around very shortly. And yeah, you organized a DiscourseNet conference 2-3 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
2018,
right? And you have worked with various people within DiscourseNet around economic discourses, economic expert discourses, which is really your area. And I'll give you the floor. Please feel free to add anything that I may have forgotten. Michael Cranert is organizing the discussion, the group discussion. We will have various slots, so people are invited to well, maybe Michael, you want to explain how the discussion works?
Yes, the idea is please ask any questions or make any comments on the chat. We'll monitor that. And when Jens says he's having a break there and wants to take questions, I will put them to Jens. If we have time at the end, it's absolutely fine to sort of maybe open the discussion, but in between it might be difficult. So we've decided to do it that way.
Okay, Jens, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for having the opportunity to present some parts of my work on economic expert discourses. My presentation today, I want to show how post-national identities are formed. And I will particularly analyze the role of economics in Europe as a discourse tool that provides political actors with a language for taking a discourse position within a center-periphery structure. The idea of my paper is basically bringing together, the main idea is that social identities emerge by an interaction of various institutional as well as discursive dynamics. So I'm, on the one hand, want to show how certain field or institution-related aspects, such as a European field, local political conflicts, or certain lexical forms are contributing to develop certain identities. But identities do not emerge from fields, they need discourses in order to be becoming visible in a symbolic and imaginary way, as Lacan would have put it. So I'm also interested in markers of discursive ethos, I'm interested in markers of speaker position, and I want to show how the other is addressed in order to construct legitimacy. I want to develop this idea or this framework in 3 chapters. And we will have a break for asking questions and giving comments after each break, after each chapter. The first chapter is on, in the first chapter I want to develop the idea of a new geography of power in Europe that takes approximately 15 minutes. In the second step, I want to show how economics is used as a discourse tool. And I want to discuss the status of economics as a language or a lexical system. And in the third chapter, I want to present an example from Polish economic expert Discourse. And here I want to show how certain two hegemonies or two identities are constructed in an industrial peripheral position. The one is what I call, or will call, a neoliberal cosmopolitanism, and the other is a social national rebellion. Okay, let's start with the first chapter, which is about the formation of a new geography of power in Europe. What I want to show is how 5 dynamics of forces are forming this new geography of power. Let's go to the first. Is Europe a society? A society is traditionally defined as an entity that is consisting of one state, one nation, one culture, one economy, one political system, and one border. But the geographical space consists of different cultures, different political systems, but one economy. And Europe is not a society. It is more like a geography. So the forming forces of this kind of field is not cannot be explained with traditional sociological tools. What we need is a new concept that helps us to understand Europe not in terms of integration, but in terms of the formation of something that belongs together but is not coherent. So what I define as a geography of power is something like a high-tech economic hierarchy and related to a heterogeneous cultural space. The second aspect or force that is basically forming this new geography of power in Europe is the construction of a new power center, which I would call the Alps-Rhine power center. This power center is formed basically by different economic dynamics, especially in the last 10 years. So what we can see here, for example, is that income moved, especially since the financial crisis in 2009, basically to Germany compared to the other big economies in Europe, such as Spain, France, Italy, and the UK. And this is taking place by a certain monopolizing effect of high-tech manufacturing. So here we see the share of manufacturing without construction to GDP. And here Germany is on a very, very high level. This is interesting. And this basically formation is taking place through a decoupling of the so-called former West, what we can see here with a decline in industrial production in the UK, in France, in Spain, in Italy, but not in Poland and in Czech Republic, and not in Hungary and the other so-called New East regions. The New East regions were incorporated into the high-tech center. And what develops from this basically process of decoupling and integration is a structure that is best explained by the representations, by the statistical representations of the so-called NUTS2 regions. So here, the regions in blue are the most powerful in terms of GDP per capita per person. Yeah, here we see a region that is basically formed in Switzerland, in Austria, in northern Italy, and then in the southwest of Germany, moving to the harbors in Antwerp and Rotterdam, including London, Paris, and some other centers, cities, big cities. So usually Europe was conceived as a kind of banana, reaching from London through Belgium, the Ruhr area, to Turin. But what we see today is no longer a banana, it is more like a pear with some leaves. So the pear is basically in the center of Europe, in the Alps, Rhine region, and then moving basically, including some leaves, the harbors, Antwerp and Rotterdam, Paris, London, and maybe also Madrid. So it is not we're not talking about Germany as the power center of Europe. It is only a part of Germany, because the east part of Germany is also excluded from it. And when we look at the ongoing Corona discourse, on the economic effect of the Corona discourse, we can easily see that the Corona discourse will increase these geo-economical transformations, and it will support existing hierarchies and even deepen these hierarchies. So just have a look at the fiscal measures taken by different countries, such as Germany, Spain, UK, France, and Italy. You can easily see that Germany accounts for approximately 50% of all measures, of all fiscal measures taken in Europe. France is accounting for 16% and Spain for 10%, approximately. So what we see here is that in the future, this structure, this geography of power will probably be supported and basically deepened. A third dynamic that is basically developing as an effect of this Alps-Rhine Center is a new division of labor in Europe. I will only present some data that will illustrate this. What we see is a strong economic interconnectedness. So here is this shows basically the indirect and direct employment effect of the German middle and electronic industry in other countries. So it accounts for 2.5 million jobs in different countries, meaning that a car firm in Germany cannot start production without their suppliers in Poland, in Italy, in Spain, and so on. So we have a strong interconnectedness. On the other hand, we find a hierarchical interconnectedness. So the so-called Visegrad countries, like Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia, are integrated in this structure as so-called extended workbenches, meaning that the entire industry that exists in Central and Eastern Europe is basically directly depending on what is going on in the Alps-Rhine Center, which is not only Germany, which is also Switzerland and Austria. And this process is basically put forward by monopolizing value, meaning that if you have a look at this chart, you can see the red line, yeah, and you can see the blue line. The blue line is traditional manufacturing, and the red line is what we call industrial services. So there's a long talk about the service sector and so on, but what are the most powerful sectors in terms of gross value added are industrial services. And most industrial services are closely connected to manufacturing, but not to all sorts of manufacturing, meaning that if you have manufacturing, it does not mean that you have power. You also need industrial services on a high level. And basically, this is basically represented by the existence of headquarters and research and development institutes. These are the main basis for industrial services. A fourth dynamic that is forming this new geography of power in Europe is a global development, which I would call as a Europe that exists among global innovation centers. Here, this shows basically selected countries' share of global trade in research-intensive goods. And research-intensive goods are not some goods. These goods are closely related to innovation centers. And here we see an increase of China, a strong position of Germany, but also of Austria and Switzerland. Switzerland is close to the UK. And a decrease of the former centers, including the US. So what we see here is basically the formation of a tripole structure that is also represented by the most attractive regions today and in 2025. Here we see Western Europe will still be among the most innovative power centers. The US will be there too, but China is coming. And these developments basically represent nothing but a sort of historical comeback of Asia, which is a long-lasting process taking place in the last since the death of Mao Zedong. I could also present some case studies, for example, from VW, which is a German, a global car producer. In 2018, VW made their entire output, 40 to 50% of their entire output in China. So the main market for car production is already China. This is documented by many other developments. Even suppliers are moving their research and development institutes to China. And what I want to say here is simply that external economic relations are becoming the main drivers for deeper economic European integration. So Europe is not only forming as a geography of power, by internal dynamics, but also by external dynamics. And the last dynamic that is forming this power center or power space or geography, space is something different, is the combination of economic administration and the national illusion. Economic administration is basically defined by the many treaties of Europe. But these treaties are not set in stone. They are open for interpretations. So there are still many possibilities to interpret these treaties. And now the Maastricht regulations were stopped within one day. It was not a problem to stop this entire Maastricht system because there is a paragraph to do it. So Europe is not a closed neoliberal space. It is an open space for interpretation taking place on the basis of economic language, as Mudge and Vauches have basically shown with their theory of avatars. But on the other hand, a certain form of national illusion emerges. The idea that there is a nation, but de facto there is no nation anymore. De facto there is a system, a space basically in that way that is ruled by certain economic tools. So the role of economics in Europe as discourse tool is important and complex. And it is the fact that we have talked about economics as the European language and not about French or German or English is closely connected to the idea that Europe was formed on the basis of economics, but not of the content of economics, rather on the form of economics. To conclude, 4 forces are forming what I would call the new geography of power. First, the geographical character of power and not the societal. Second, a new industrial high-tech center. Third, a European unequal division of labor. Fourth, external pressures in the globalized field of innovations. And innovations is very important because we are now in an open situation. And fifth, the role of economics and of national illusionism. Okay, do you have questions?
Right. Looking in the chat, there are a couple of things that came up as actually the main question was the comparison of fiscal measures in the Europe table on the pie chart. What is the source of them? And the other question connected to that was, could you just show these fiscal measures again and explain them? Because I got lost in them, what these different measures are and what they mean, why Germany is so high on them. That would be quite useful. And I think, did I catch them all, Lillian? I think so.
Yes, Michael, there's 2 questions. Yeah.
Okay, I can say this is very, very, very short. This is data from 16th April, but I think things have not changed so much. There are some immediate fiscal impulses. For example, providing people with unemployment support. Yeah, there are also so-called Kurzarbeitergeld. It is a money that is used to pay workers in factories that are not bankrupt. There are other forms of impulses. For example, they provide little firms and artists with money, not credits, to just give them the money. There are deferrals are basically taxes that should not be paid yet, and they also allow not to pay other fees. And other liquidity guarantees means that the state is providing banks with a guarantee that the banks give firms a credit. So normally banks have to check if the firm is still is the investment basically safe or not, and it takes time, but we don't have time. And so the state says, well, we guarantee with 100% for all the credits you give to these firms, if you give it today, now, immediately. So these are basically three forms of impulses, and this is measured in terms of GDP. So if they take the entire product produced in 1 year by each country, and they just estimate how much would it be. And here we see in the United Kingdom, the universal credit, for example, is part of this, but they have also this money for saving jobs, and some others. And if you compare it, for example, here's Germany with 10% of the GDP, which is 400 trillion euros, billion euros, which is immediately given to the economy, immediately, that we have no unemployment or less unemployment and so forth. And other countries, such as Italy, was not able to do, and France was 2 to 4%, and the UK was 4 to 5%, but nobody knows if the money is coming to the people because the bureaucracy it's unclear. But if we take it, these countries, all countries invest in their industrial, in their service, and in their infrastructure to keep it alive through the crisis. Because the main point is there will be a restart whenever it takes place. It takes place now, basically, and only those countries or regions which can manage this restart will be in a leading position in 2025, for example, or 2023 even. Because now many technologies are getting introduced into the economy. 5G, for example, that's just one example, but also the green energy and so on. And those regions which will be can start a bit earlier, a few weeks or months, will be or can reorganize existing value chains and markets. And this is a big discussion at the European level, because Germany is putting in 50% of all the money which is put in by all European states, and France only 16%. And when Germany is putting in 50% and France 16%, of course, the differences between two countries, and Italy and Spain as well, will increase. And this is the reason why we have now something like Corona bonds, which is a similar thing. Because otherwise, the Europe will be completely dominated by the Germans. Is that okay?
Yeah, if we have, I think we have a bit more time, because now the discussion is actually getting going in the chat, and there's two more things that you maybe can comment on if you would like to. One is the question whether what you are describing is actually truly new, or whether the nation state hasn't always been an illusion that is quite closely sort of linked to economical thinking. That was one side. But somebody else commented, or Johannes commented on this, of saying this is a very German perspective on power defined by industrial and technological productivity. And I think these two questions you might be able to discuss them together.
Is it new? I think this nation state developed, and when it was established, it started to disintegrate. So it never existed, basically. But the nation state played different roles during the different phases on periods of capitalist development. And now we are in a situation where we have basically a nation state like China, a nation state like the US, and a nation state like Germany, Italy, France. These are regions. These would be regions in China, basically. Yeah? Even Europe is as big as 2 or 3 provinces in China. So we are in a different situation, but also there was especially in the 50s, 60s, 70s national car industries, and these national car industries were developed within the nation state, and not only car industries but also many other industries. And these industries basically became Europeanized exactly in 2091 when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, and the main actors became globalized and developed basically international production structures. And also by this process was also increased by digitalization and transportation, different transportation systems. So there are certain developments which have basically supported this development. And is it a German perspective? I don't know. I think the question or comment. In my opinion, what I see when I look at the way how basically power is distributed globally, I would expect those regions which are able to define a certain nodal points within industrial service knowledge networks. These actors which can define certain nodal points here, certain nodal points which are defined by technology, but not only by technology, also by rules, have an impact on the world market. And the best example is China and the introduction of the battery engine. So China said, well, we want the battery engine. And China, the Chinese government implemented the rules, the regulations for China. They will only take battery engines. And the car industry will not develop three or four different technologies. They will have one technology because it is the cheapest, and then they will go on for a competition on this technology. So China was able, because of the huge inner market and their strong political and economic position, to define a global standards for all car productions in the future. And this is what I mean with industrial power. And industrial power, as I said before, is not related to traditional manufacturing. It is mainly related to a specific combination of high-tech manufacturing and industrial services, especially through headquarters, because these are the places where the rules can be defined, and research and development, because these parts of production chains are the ones with the highest gross value added, and they basically take all the money from these entire production processes. And this is the reason why industry is important. It is not traditional manufacturing, it is innovation and technology, and the ability to monopolize it, to hegemonize it. This is the point.
Great. Maybe a good point to move on to the next chapter.
To the next?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now we come to chapter 2. What does economics mean? So we have seen before that economics is basically a language that is used in the administration of Europe, but economics is not only part of the administration. It became part of it became a cultural heritage of Europe, which is used by different actors to take different positions. So what does economics mean? Is economics a concept, meaning an academic or scientific language that is used to understand the world? Is it an ideology that is basically produced for developing something like a false consciousness? Yeah? Is it performative, meaning that economics is a science that is creating certain imaginary objects, and these imaginary objects are taken by the economy to make them real? Yeah? Or is it a language, and this is what I would say it is. It is a language, it is a lexical system of metaphors and discourse tool for the use of identity formation in post-national heterogeneous social spaces. The idea is basically that we are not talking about economics as something that has a specific content, but economics has a certain metaphorical character. So economics does only exist as a metaphor, as an ongoing, as a floating metaphor, as a floating signifier, if you like. And as such, it is open for many, many different interpretations. It can be used as a political tool, it can be used as a scientific tool, it can be used as a language to interact. Yeah, it can be used as different things in different contexts. And this metaphorical character of economics is what I would call a lexis. Yeah? It is a lexical system that is open for everybody to use it and to speak with it, which does not mean that everybody who uses and speaks with economics is a powerful person. We also need different institutional things, yeah, to develop a speaker position out of it. And in Europe, it is basically in the US and the UK, of course, are regions where concepts like financialization, financial markets, finance, and so on is extremely important. Why? Because both countries are characterized by strong financial sectors and by very, very weak industrial sectors. Both have very weak industrial sectors, less than 10% and of GDP. And on the other hand, both regions, countries have developed global corporations, which are, for example, Google. The most important market for Google is China and not the US. You know? The same is for General Motors and BMW. So firms developed which are globalized. And in other regions, in Europe, economists use not so much this financial talk to get recognized and seen, but they are used basically very, not traditional, but very, very innovative, also sociologically inspired concepts of industry service networks. So the communication in Europe is much, much more informed by industrial economics, labor economics, specific forms of development economics, now environmental economics, and all these other forms, yeah, which are probably not so much not as present as in every other region of the world. So the idea is basically of this paper that a new geography of power plus economics as lexis are basically forming the two aspects which are contributing to the discursive formation of European identities. Okay.
Okay, chat. Just 1 second. Question for clarification. What are speaker positions? Are they different from subject positions?
Okay, it is a technical question. What I will analyze in the next step is speaker position, because speaker position is basically, I would say, a speaker position is much more related to language, and the subject position is more comprehensive. It is including so a speaker position can circulate. Yeah, we can easily take all kinds of speaker positions, but a subject position is something that persons must take. So if persons take a speaker position, and if persons are institutionalized in a certain way, meaning that persons are officers, are professors, are for example presidents, and so on, and this is basically when a speaker position and an institutionalized position come together, I would speak about subject positions. And identities are related to subject positions.
Mm-hmm. Another question is from Jan. Would you say that finances are the language of Anglo-Saxon countries on the one hand, and economics is the language of Europe and China? Is that the sort of distinction you would make?
Yeah. So at least what I see, yeah, at least what I see, it should be analyzed basically in detail. But many discussions on financialization and finance markets and so on, the entire development of the Washington blah blah complex. This is all coming from the UK and from the US, and in Europe we see in Italy there is a big branch of economists working on very former old style industrial relations. Yeah, this is also taking place in Germany and in Poland. I've seen many very interesting analyses on how the industry develops, how it changed, how certain programs are implemented, how Industry 4.0 is now implemented. There is, in my personal experience, it is finance and financial language is much more related to the US, and economics as a conflict between neoliberal economics and Keynesian economics. Always this conflict is part of Europe, and in China it is as much as I know, it is even different. It is in China. It is more. That is a combination of a planning economy, of certain Keynesian tools, but there's also a certain monetaristic idea of competition. So what I see, what I hear from researchers doing projects in China is a combination, a completely chaotic combination of central planning and local anarchy. So I cannot say what China exactly is, but they use everything. They are open for everything.
Okay, and here's a theoretical question that's actually my own. As a linguist, I'm struggling a bit with your term of lexis and a lexical system. Wouldn't you say, I would suggest that what you're talking about is more a signifying system, because economics is used here as an argumentative structure for certain goals. Because as a linguist, I would misread this as you are talking about words, but what you're actually talking about is arguments that they're making and that they're using to following a certain goal, or certain metaphorical systems. And they are certainly not restricted to lexis. They're often actually on a syntactical level or on a discursive level. But that's the sort of, so I'm not quite sure if that's the right term, or why you chose that term. That would be the question.
Yes, it is a good point. I think it is impossible to present an argument which is content and form without using a specific system of words. Yeah? And I would say what I've seen in economics very often is that two people take the same data, the same chart, and draw completely different conclusions from it, even contradicting conclusions. So the same system of words and signs is used to develop contradicting arguments. How would you call this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to go into the discussion because nobody else can, so I'm just leaving it there and give it. Jaspal says, call it a metaphorical field. I think that's it from the chat. So if you want to move on, I'm sure we'll have more time after we've seen the whole thing.
Okay. Okay. Chapter 3, an example from Polish economic expert discourse. In this discourse analysis, I want to show how two economic expert reports basically tried to define the situation of Poland in 2015. This was a time when the PiS party won elections. And this was a time when, also a time when all Polish economists basically discussed on where we are now. Because after the 90s, when a lot of expectations emerged about freedom and democracy and the market, a strong US orientation, and the so-called crash cure, how is it called? Anyway, was introduced. There was basically the time of basically Poland in the 90s started with a crash and then emerged with some growth. And then there were some years of hope, especially after 2000. But in 2010, it became more and more clear that Poland will remain in a so-called middle income trap, meaning that there is no growth possible because of the industry on a lower and middle level. But they will not fall apart. They are basically trapped. This was the discussion. And the McKinsey report did a report basically led by the people from the government of the 90s, by the so-called neoliberals, if you like. And the Morawiecki plan, Morawiecki is now the prime minister of Poland, and he was at this time a super minister in finance and in economics. And he was basically responsible for developing a future economic plan for Poland, in order to, yeah, whatever. Let's have a look. I'm interested in three different aspects of this discourse: the formation of a speaker position by discursive temporality, in placing communicative slots, and how basically the discourse speaks in the name of the other as a normalizing authority, and third, in the speaker's ethos or discursive subjectivity, if you like. Okay, let's start with the first aspect. How is temporality organized in discourse? And this is basically the first part of the Morawiecki plan from the PIS side, which is a kind of economic diagnosis. And we can have a look at it. Within the last 10 years, the Polish economy has developed at a relatively fast rate, in particular when compared to the entire EU. However, due to adverse external factors and the exhaustion of simple growth reserves activated in Poland after the economic system transformation, cheap labor, external funds, including from the EU, combined with the lack of new drivers, the economic growth has slowed down in recent years, and so on and so on. And then we see a lot of traps: development trap, income trap, average growth trap, demographic trap, weak institutions trap, and so on. A lot of trap. And now we go to the McKinsey report, which is also a diagnosis of the same situation. Poland's growth has been based primarily on dynamic exports, strong internal demand, productivity improvements, foreign direct investments, and the inflow of EU funds, which is the same. This growth was supported by the buoyant demographics of the 80s baby boom, as well as a stable banking system. Now, however, the environment has changed. Some of the fundamentals, including the volume of the FDI, foreign direct investments, annual productivity, and export growth are slowing, while others, such as the flow of EU funds, will likely narrow after 2020. And what I see here is basically the PIS discourse. Here, the speaker takes a position by T0 by drawing basically a more or less drastic line between the past, where everything was well, and the present. And so keeping the past on distance. And T0 is basically constructed as a discursive caesura. In the past, something happened, and now something must change. And in the McKinsey discourse, the subject takes a position in T0 by building a bridge between the past and the present, keeping the past in line with the present. A second aspect is basically how is legitimacy organized by the discourse. And we look again to the Morawiecki plan, which is now the part that is presenting the economic policy, things that must be done. And here I will not read it. I will just point to some words which are interesting in my opinion. They speak about stable foundations, entrepreneurship, hard work, resources and skills of Poles. They talk about growth of income of the Polish population, social, economic, territorial cohesion, and so on. And let's have a look at the policy by the McKinsey report. Here it's interesting, the two scenarios stand out. Poland can opt to stay the course, remaining a regionally focused middle income economy. Alternatively, it can speak to accelerate the pace, catch up with advanced economies and become globally competitive growth engine of Europe, competing successfully on the global market. And I think what is interesting here is that basically the discourse is calling certain norms, values, and legitimacies that are located at the poles, hardworking people, and so on. Yeah? And the discursive subject speaks in the name of social, national, and local beings in a very undramatic way. And the McKinsey discourse norms, values, and legitimacy are located at the global. If you want to be successful, you must be global. And that is a top of hierarchy relation within it. And here, the global meritocracy is basically the name, the big other in which the subject is speaking. Legitimacy, if you want to be good, is basically must be global and successful. If you're not, you are a loser. And the third point, which I want to make here, is how subjectivity is organized. And what I found interesting is that we see in the Morawiecki plan, words like responsible development, stable foundations, innovation-based, sustainable, responsible development strategy, this is how the plan also called, cohesion, and also sustainable economic growth, socially and territorially sustainable inclusion, and all basically very, very, very undramatic, yeah? Nouns which are not really producing any form of specific superiority. And here we see basically it is a language that is basically used or related to meritocratic values. Either you remain and then you will be stay at home, or you catch up with the global competition, and then you will be the leading economy and globally competitive growth engine. This is basically how the ethos is basically produced. And here we see subjectivity and ethos are formed by a more moderate, undramatic, pragmatic, popular attitude. And in the McKinsey discourse, I see indicators for a certain form of superiority, competition, and excellence. Okay, and this would be my the end of chapter 2. So what I see is basically, on the one hand, what I would call a neoliberal cosmopolitanism. On the other hand, a social national rebellion. The one is bridging with the past, the other is breaking with the past. The one is calling to a global meritocracy, and the other is speaking in the name of the poles as the people. The one has a more superior and success-oriented subjectivity, and the others are more pragmatic, popular, moderate, speaking to the normal people. Okay, have you comments and questions?
Sorry, I was just slow finding the buttons. Let me just see. I'm trying to get through this. Start from the back. What do we learn from the text analysis, and why do we need it? No, Jens doesn't see the chat, Johannes, or might not. So there was a bit of discussion going on about what you're doing there. I mean, my one question would be, could you go back to your third conclusion? Just give us a bit more sort of examples into that, because I got lost in the sort of moderate, undramatic, pragmatic attitude. Where is that encapsulated? And then the superiority. I just lost that because I couldn't follow that quickly.
So if we have a look at this text, we try to find words that are basically as Magnot probably would have done it. I don't know if he personally would have done it that way, but I'm looking for words that are basically pointing to the ethos of the subject, pointing to what the subject is basically, or in what name the subject is basically or speaking. And what we see here is a language that is, for example, the responsible development concept defined there means that economic growth should rely on stable foundations. So kind of more conservative, more like conservative words, stable convention, stable, innovation-based. All these words, sustainable, responsible, cohesion, is, in my opinion, a general language that is not producing a certain form of heroic subjectivity. The subject that is speaking here is actually a people-oriented populist. They try to speak in the name of the normal people. They are winning their elections not in Warsaw, but in the East Polish hinterland. And they have to talk to mayors from small cities. They have to talk to people who are in a negative way affected by economic developments. And I think this is generally a language that is basically moving the subjectivity basically to the background. And if we look at this part here, at this discourse, we see a different language. Here it is very drastic. 2 scenarios stand out, and not 3 and not 4. Poland can opt to stay the course, remaining a regionally focused middle-income economy. Alternatively, it can seek to accelerate the pace, catch up to an advanced. Yeah, it's a different. It's basically it's pointing to here and to somewhere else, and then going globally competitive growth. These are all words that suggest a certain form of superiority, a certain form of being special and not one of the many. This is what I mean. And here is what I take from it. Mm-hmm. More undramatic, moderate, pragmatic, popular, and then either excellent or you will be a loser for the rest of your history.
the question then is in the chat. So what do we learn from the textual analysis, and how does it relate to the vision of European power that you sort of laid out at the beginning?
This is what I will discuss in the conclusion.
Ah, that's still to come. Okay. And another comment is audience design. Jaspal is interested to know more how the reading and about the reading and listening subject. Who reads these reports? Who are they trying to convince?
It's very interesting. They are both written in English and Polish, yeah, in two different languages. And in Polish, of course, it is the Polish population is a high-skilled population on a very, very high level. And these discussions take place on the level of regions, how it's called, on the level of regions, on the level of cities, but also on the levels of people who basically, are well educated and can understand what is going on. So it is basically related to the Polish establishment, if this name is allowed. But on the other hand, it is published in English. And there is a big discussion among these kind of economists from various countries. They participate with discussion with people from Czech Republic, Hungary, Germany, France, Italy. So there is a discourse that is not really popular in German newspapers, but this is taking place on the level of experts, on the middle level, on the semi level of experts, and they basically talk not only to their own people, to their own population, but also to a European audience. And they try to explain basically why they do what and what should be done why. It is an entirely European discourse. It is not a national discourse. Otherwise, it would only be in Polish. So it is a European discourse. It is basically they invite others to try to understand what is going on in Poland by using the English language. And this is read by journalists, for example, those journalists who want to participate in such a discourse. Of course, it takes some time. You must try to talk to the people. You must try to understand it. And many authors from these discourses are also internationally very mobile. Many of them speak German, and many of them were appointed at different institutes. It's more smaller institutes, not at the big LSE or so, but in Mannheim, for example, or in Frankfurt, in Milano, so somewhere else. They're moving around in Austria. There are some think tanks which invite always people from different European countries, and they have discussions open discussions about the economic future of a region like Central and Eastern Europe. It is a big thing for many people, not for the Western, not for many in the West, not for the finance-oriented and the elite-oriented. They are not interested in it. They don't even know it. They read countries like Poland and Czech Republic and Hungary through the panopticon of fascism and authoritarianism. They don't see the rest. I think this is the context that I've seen through the authors and other papers.
There are two more, I think, and then we could potentially move on to the conclusion. So one is why these reports, or this report and not others, and the other one is words such as sustainable and stable. Are they empty signifiers when referring to countries, and in what sense?
I would say economics as a language, the conceptual language of economics. This is metaphorical, but of course, sustainable and so on. This is not a concept. This is a conventional word that is used in a more or less conventional way. So how I read it. I'm not interested in the content of economics. We can have a look at economic concepts are something like market, competition. Middle income trap is concept too, but not only. And these concepts are used as metaphors. But of course, I'm more interested in every word that is basically used in a more or less conventional way. Because when we look at the contents of both reports, we see, we find that 95% of both reports are exactly the same. Yeah, there's only one difference, and this is basically in providing people with social benefits. So the PiS government promised social benefits, the motherhood money, I think it's called, and the other side said, well, you can't do it because we don't have the money to pay for it. Then they did it and they paid for it, and then, yeah, this is now a situation basically. There is no way for the others to come back, I think. Anyway, why these both reports? Of course, Morawiecki, this is the plan. This is now the prime minister. It was basically the main government concept of the PiS government, which is still at work today. And the other report, McKinsey report, it was a group of people from the former governments who lost elections. Basically, opposition and government.
Great. I think that's it so far.
Okay, let's come to the conclusion. I will make some theoretical conclusions and some empirical conclusions. First, theoretical conclusions. So economic expert discourses do not simply express policies and academic concepts. They rather contribute to the discoursive formation of subjectivities. This is what I want to show. Yeah? When we talk about economics, we are not talking about something that is really existing outside. We're talking about a way that allows people to speak in a certain way, a modality that allows people to speak in a certain way. Second, subjectivities always express and reflect the structural position in the new geography of power that works as a hidden background of discourse production. And I was thinking about Lacan's places of truth and production here, or Marx's idea of the base. So what we see here is basically a subordinate level. Poland as a typical case for a newly integrated region on a subordinated level. It is basically on the hierarchy. It is very, very on the bottom of the hierarchy. Nothing happened really compared to other regions, except to Greece and except to Portugal. Greece moved down because of the austerity measures, and Poland moved up because, yes, it's just a little bit. So nothing changed really. And this subordinate position, economic position, provides institutional resources, specific institutional resources, allows speaker to speak, to take a certain institutional position, and they produce certain discourses. So Poland, for example, combines, generally speaking, because of this subordinate position, a specific form, in my opinion, of obsession with the Germans. On the one hand, the Germans are seen as fascists that basically dominate everything. But on the other hand, Polish economists, and all of them, not only both camps, are very much inspired by German industrial policy. So they learn from the Germans and hate. This is a kind of ambivalent relationship. And this is only possible through this economic position. And this economic position allows for the production of specific economics words that then develop certain discourses. And on the other hand, subject positions articulate discursive modalities of seeing the world and finding a place within a symbolic imaginary universe. So what we have seen here is the one basically offer a symbolic imaginary position of excellence and competition. Go on and we will do it. Finally, we will become like the Germans. This is what the neoliberals say. And the PiS party says, well, this is not possible. There is a problem. And they choose the option to speak in the name of the Poles. We have to think of our own people. Yeah? And these two modalities are constructed as a combination of economic constraints on the one hand and the specific use of economics as a discourse tool. So how it comes together. This is how it comes together. And empirical conclusions, I would say nationalism in this case seems to work like a gift in Marcel Mauss's sense, or a compensation for economic exclusion and structural marginalization. It is an emotional component. They can't offer to the people money, wealth, and welfare, so they offer to them national identity. Second, the neoliberal cosmopolitan identities are in deep crisis. Many things they say today sounds in the ears of many people, not of all people, like mockery and scorn. And I think now after the Corona thing, it is completely over. This is the second conclusion. So the one is no longer able to act, and the others try to develop a compensatory discourse for the people, to keep them together. And with every crisis, this is the third empirical conclusions, the European discursive field is producing new identification projects formed by diverse forces. And finally, I think this is not bad news, but good news. Europe is, in my opinion, and this is what we can see today as well, a strong and flexible socio-discursive entanglement, and is therefore fit for the future. Europe is strong not because it is split and it is discussing and there are many controversies. It is strong because of these controversies, because it is allowed to speak in the name of the people and to leave this position earlier or later. Thank you. Now we can have final questions, I think.
Thank you. I think I haven't seen any new questions, so shall we just open that? How does this relate to the earlier idea of geography in Germany as a center? Is Jan asking.
Okay. Poland, the PiS party is a nationalist conservative party. They are expected to leave the Union, to the European Union, and create a Polish society, yeah, on the basis of Polish culture. And then they will erect borders, and they dream the dream of a life in well-being and in happiness, because they formed a nation state. Or the Polish industry is completely depending on the German industry, because they are controlled by the research and development as well as centers, as well as by the headquarters, located all at the Alps-Rhine Center. They get their they are only middle level or low level suppliers for them. And if they would erect a border, they would basically destroy their own industry within a week or less, as we have seen when Poland basically closed the borders for a few days only, yeah, for trucks. Not for trucks, but for cars. So it is not possible. It is simply impossible. It is impossible to get out of this. Europe is simply, on the institutional level, too strong, too much interconnected, and too strong hierarchically organized. The other way is we develop a discourse, a nationalist discourse, and a socialist discourse as well, in order to provide the people who feel as losers of the development with some emotional compensation. Then go on and try to fix our position institutionally and develop a way of seeing the Western world that allows both sides to exist. They cannot change the hierarchy, and on the other hand, they cannot leave it as it is. And this ambivalence, this impossibilities, structural impossibilities, basically lead to certain discursive solutions. And this is basically what they are figuring out. This is how they are related on an unconscious and conscious way to the center.
There's one more question saying, do you need to make your own identity or subjectivity explicit when you analyze this sort of construction of subjectivities of others? So how is that linked?
I don't know. I think I've explained that I'm following basically a Lacanian theory of subjectivity, consisting of an unconscious level and different symbolic imaginary parts. So subjectivity is not only something that can be explained and put on the table. This is my subjectivity. Please take it or leave it. I don't know. Subjectivity is something that is always rooted in our institutional context, always rooted in our biographies and in history, of course. We cannot speak from a place where we can see the entire world. We can only speak from a certain point. And what I can make explicit is my arguments, my data, how I connect it, how I see it, and what I can basically, and how we can go on. So I think argumentation is always not bad when it allows for critique, when it allows for variation, and when it allows for developing further arguments on the basis of data, even if data are not perfect.
Right. Yes. Thanks for that. Leonard says who asked the question. And another one. We've got two more questions, and I think then we should bring this to a close, just being conscious of the time, and probably sort of just give it back to Johannes to close. One is, what would you say about the position of ordinary social actors in this context? How can everyday economists who don't have that expert knowledge, grasp or challenge these different models?
So I'm not an expert of Poland. I'm in close contact with some friends and colleagues, and we are talking sometimes about the situation in different countries. So what I see is basically that there are grassroots movements in Poland. Poland has still a very strong liberal civil society. They're extremely reflected, in my opinion. So we can talk about all kind of theory, all kind of, yeah, it is impressive, in my opinion. And there is also a Nazi movement in Poland. I don't know, I think I've seen it on some occasions. So I think both challenge it on a specific way. The Nazis take it serious. They take the words, wordly, is it the right word? I don't know. They take the words serious. And of course, they are the most dangerous opponents to the government. And then there is a left, urbanized milieu, which is huge in my opinion. And they basically try to find out a different way of this disaster. They see the problems, the social problems, especially the split between poor and the wealthy people in Poland, which exist, which is very huge. And they see the problems, but they try to find out a way out of this twin disaster of national conservatism and social subordination, economic subordination, by developing a new way of seeing. This is what is going on now. And it can take probably 10 years or so, and there will be another different government, but it can also take 5 years. Depends on maybe an external shock, and things are changing.
Very interesting, because you've almost answered the next question that I've said. Wouldn't you say that the major cleavage that you identify must be analyzed as overdetermined by public discourses about immigration, ethnicity, moral values, employment, and so on? So that's what you've already almost.
Not all Poles are against migrants.
Sorry?
Not all Poles are against migrants.
No, but these things are obviously sort of overdetermined by the discourses that are the loudest, and you've just sort of outlined this fascist discourse that is going on there.
The loudest, but sometimes it is loud because a Spiegel journalist is interested in a scandal, and they have a lot of power to form opinions, and they are only interested in scandals, not in realities. This is a problem, in my opinion. It does not help. It does not help the liberal forces in Poland.
Great. Thank you very much for some really strong food for thoughts here, and thank you everybody for asking questions and taking active part in the chat. And I'm giving the floor back to Johannes to say when the next one is and to bring it to a close.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for participating here. We're planning to have a next intervention in, I think it's in 2 weeks' time, around the 6th of June. But we still need to sort out the agenda and the calendar, so we'll send around an email once we know. So there's no decision yet on how we and who will take go ahead with the next talk.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. It's good to have had so many people here. We were 33 in total. That is great. So we hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time. It's the 5th I have in my diary. But we will send this around the group and publicize the link. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Shall we do a quick debrief, Julio, Lillian, and Jens, and maybe Johannes?
Yes.
Should we just stay here?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe end the recording.
Yeah.